Hello, everybody. So Reed Krakoff, our esteemed guest, is running a little late. So I'm going to take a little longer. Anyway, I want to welcome all of you. We have alumni here, we have guests, we have family, we have faculty. But first, I don't know if I can see you that well. I want you to raise your hands if you went to anything else today as part of our Alumni Day. Oh, that is fantastic. Because actually, we have about, 1,000 people signed up for today, or 1,200. 60% of you graduated within the last 10 years. And that's pretty exciting. And maybe what I should do is tell you who I am and why I'm standing here. And my name is Kay Unger, and I'm a fashion designer. And I graduated Parsons in 1968, long time ago. Then it was on East 54th Street. And I used to pass, it was a dump. Such a dump. And no windows, old factory building. And it was so incredibly different. I mean, for me, it was fun. Also, it was so different. I used to literally roll my mannequin to school every day, roll it home, and pass by Katharine Hepburn, Greta Garbo, and so on, because we didn't have the amazing facilities we have here today. But the other thing that was so different is I learned about fashion, and I learned about art. I didn't know about sustainability. I didn't know, get to study journalism. I didn't get to study anthropology or business. So when I graduated Parsons, I started my own business about 2 years later, and I've been a fashion designer and owned my own business for 49 years. Bravo. And one of my favorite employees is sitting right here in the audience. She worked for me for 10 years, so that's pretty exciting. And I usually don't pat myself on the back, but it is, I guess, amazing that in 1970 I started my own company, woman-owned, for 49 years. I had a lot of this. But all of you are so lucky because Parsons is so different today. And I now am chairman of the board of Parsons for the last 7 years and a trustee of the New School. And I've sold my shares in my company, and this is one of my favorite things to do. It is the best second career anybody could ever have. And what the kids learn today and what you learned, most of you, and certainly Reed, we'll talk more about him. I'll join Joel over there in a minute. You learn to be fully well-rounded people. When I got out of Parsons, I held the dress up and I go, what do you think this should cost? I had no clue. I mean, it's amazing. I learned on the job. Now there's strategic design and management and so many other social justice, sustainability. I believe that all of you and all of us together can really change the world and make it a better place. But I'm going to come over and join our wonderful executive dean, Joel Towers. Now, Joel, over the last 10 years, has really had the vision to make Parsons, for many years now, #1 art and design school in the United States and #2 in the world. The pedagogy, the changing of the curriculum. So many of you took a tour of the Making Center. That was Joel's vision. And when I said I went to a dump, and that was a dump for a long time. Now the community, the Sheila Johnson Design Center, these are wonderful places. And I hope that you as alumni will get involved as I did. I taught a long time ago with Tim Gunn, and then Sheila Johnson's the one who brought me back. So now the other thing is I certainly want to thank the committee that worked so hard on this reunion, and Dustin, who is our new head of alumni engagement, And we have here Dee McDonald Miller, who is on my board, who's head of alumni engagement and works really hard to make all this possible for all of you. So Joel.
Living. Welcome, everybody. It's great to see you all again. We need to do this more than once a year. And Kay and I are going to have a little conversation while we wait for Reed to show up, and then you can all engage in ribbing Reed for being a little late when he actually shows up.
Well, it's New York.
It's New York. And Reed is such a great friend of the school. He's been a board member, and we'll talk about some of this for many, many years. And in fact, he and I have had the pleasure of engaging in a lot of these conversations over the years. So I probably have an idea of some of the things he would say, but I want to get him to say those things.
Well, I also think that, like I told you a little bit about my journey and how I didn't know anything about business. And I think Reed has done such an amazing job of what we call design thinking and problem solving. And his career, which he will tell you the journey, has been so fascinating and so interesting and also, quite honestly, so successful. So I can't wait to hear it as well.
Absolutely. But I thought what Kay and I could do is have just maybe a little bit more off-the-cuff, candid conversation about where Parsons is, where design is going today. Kay is far too modest in the influence that she's had as the chair of this board over 7 years. We've really partnered and with many, many other people from our board and from the faculty and the leadership of the school to transform it into a place that we believe, not only what the external raters tell us, but what we believe is really capturing the position of art and design and innovation and creativity at this moment in time. One of the great, really tremendous things about being in the new school, and by the way, the new school is about to turn 100 in this coming year. And Parsons, a couple years later, will turn 125. So we like to say we're older than our parents, but that's a... and these markers are actually really critical, right? Not just that we've been around for a long time, which we have, but it's a recognition of a place that is really committed to renewal, committed to saying, okay, we were doing that well, but what are the questions today? What are the issues for us now in the fields in which we're studying, and how do we remake and reformulate the school? And in fact, that's been its history over the 125 years at Parsons, as well as the 100 years of the new school, to look honestly at the moment in which you're living and say, what is education for in that moment, and how do you look forward to the kind of challenges that people will likely face and educate for that? And so I think the thing that has made the school successful has been a real commitment to that kind of thinking, and in specific, that has meant putting design and creativity and innovation at the center of really everything that goes on. Now, some of this starts from the environment question that we talk about sometimes, but it's broader in a lot of ways than that as well.
Well, I think it's interesting. Obviously, I was trained in fashion. And in looking at our fashion department today, and I don't know how many of you studied fashion or went into it, but we have these wonderful systems classes and solution-based classes to the problems that exist out in the world. And whether it's zero waste, I'm sure many of you saw in the Making Center the Shimaseki knitting machines, where you could knit a t-shirt or a sweater, and there's no waste. One of the things you may not know is now our students are learning how to make something sustainable from the get-go. Meaning there won't be something to throw away, hopefully. There won't be. You might be doing circular economy, but we're making things and thinking about them ahead of time and how we can make a difference. And we have this big audience here. I want to make sure to do one political thing and make sure all of you vote, whatever you vote for. But I feel very strongly about it. And I know we're going to be traveling. You can do your absentee ballot and so on and so forth. But I think all of us, we know how to solve problems. We were taught that. And we stayed up all night and we did all these things. And we can make those changes. And voting is really one of them.
So how about in this few moments that we have before Reed gets here, that you shout out some questions like what's going on at Parsons or things that we could tell you about or we could talk about voting.
Anybody brave enough to ask a question?
Who wants to know what's going on?
Lilia,
Yeah.
you can stand up.
First of all, I'm honored to be a Parsons alumni and working with you for 10 years.
Can we get Lilia a mic? I can get Lilia a mic.
I'll give her mine.
Well, they won't hear you in the back no matter how loud you speak because it'll project this way.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Well, I have a question for Kay. Kay, you've inspired me so much for many years, and I finally opened up my own brand. So the question is, what would be your advice before I launch my product next month?
I think my advice, and I think that Maggie and many people who were helping today, is even in this world of technology, which it was not part of my career, as you know, I was hands-on, visiting and traveling 30 weeks a year for 49 years, being in the dressing room with the customer. You need to know who your product is for, no matter what it is, whether it's clothing, advertising, architecture, home design. Don't make it what you want it to be. Make sure you're making something that somebody wants. That you can stand for it and believe in it. Maybe they will want it, but understand that if you have a relationship with your customer, any kind of relationship, and you can solve their problems and make them happy, you're going to be successful. And you can do it in your own way. So just make sure, Lilia, that there is an audience. You know, a lot of times you can make a product and there's nowhere to sell it, nowhere to hang it, nowhere it's for someone to buy it. At least now with online technology, you can pretty much put anything out there. But just make sure you believe in it, that it fits a use that people need, and that it's quality no matter what it costs.
Well, you taught me well that.
And that you love it and you're happy doing it. Because if you're doing it for yourself, starting your own business, you better be happy, even though it's very difficult. If you love it, it'll be worth it.
Thank you, Kay.
Anybody else? Dee, here. I've got an extra one here, Joe.
So I graduated in 1975 in what is now the School of Constructed Environments, but at that time was environmental design. I'm going to ask a question, but I do want to know, who here graduated during the 70s? Fabulous. Please go to the reception after this event because we're doing a photograph of everyone from the 1970s. So please make sure you go over there. And if you guys would like to do it for the 80s or the 90s, we can all make that happen as well. But from environmental design, and because of your passion and the passion that you've involved the school so far from a sustainability, I'm not going to mention the luxury brand's name, but there was an article a couple of months ago about a luxury brand burning all of their clothes to protect their brand. So I'd like you to kind of talk a little bit about that.
Burning all their clothes to do what?
To protect their, as they said, to protect their brand.
Oh, you mean what happens with returns and so forth. Look, I was recently at a conversation, a sort of film opening with the Danish ambassador, and the discussion was about sustainability and design, and the thing that I usually say about the place that we're in is that the world that we live in has been designed to be exactly the way it is. There isn't a corner of this planet that hasn't been touched by human action. Intentional human action, that's what I think design is. It's the ability to actually transform materials and products and energy into the things of everyday life, which is to say that we have designed the planet poorly because we find ourselves with a set of systems and practices that are completely unsustainable. And so the challenge that we have today is to redesign the processes, to redesign the behaviors, to redesign pretty much everything in order to take account of the time in which we live and the constraints and realities of this world, but to do so with incredible passion, to do so with the beauty of design, to do so with desire, as Kay was just saying, behind the products that we make. And we live at a time in which this information is completely ubiquitous. Anybody who wants to know about where their products come from, where their designs are, what the impacts of those are, can do so very easily through technology. And so the companies that see waste in their as a intentional outcome of their design or a vehicle to protect themselves, in this case, from too much product in the market or the concern that things will be stolen as ideas and so forth, have got to reform themselves to understand that the concept of waste itself is a human idea. Waste is a human notion. There is no waste in nature. And so our capacity to design those ideas out of our own systems is where we have to begin. And it's actually, from my perspective, it's the most exciting time to be thinking about design because really everything has to be rethought. So that's my 2 cents on, well, it's more than 2 cents. And if there's a soapbox, I would stand on it around that. And what happens in Parsons today is that these ideas around products and systems and services and how you ask those questions are embedded in the entire curriculum. And so we have students in every discipline who are figuring out how to solve these problems from their own perspective, and how to do so in ways that build successful companies, financially viable companies, making beautiful and desirable objects and solutions and business models and buildings in the world. And they're doing so in a circular way, as Kay was referring to the circular economy. They're doing so in a way that takes account of their own actions and understands how to think about the future and reuse and disassembly and all of those cycles. It's the most exciting time to be in design, I think. Yes, we have 2, 3 questions. Now people are. Now we're cooking. I'm gonna. Thanks.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Marie Driscoll. I teach here.
Sorry, yes.
I teach funding, fashion, and beauty, and I love hearing what you just said. My question to you is, it's different when we think about design, building a business from scratch today versus retrofitting existing businesses. So what's your advice to existing profitable businesses that really need to redesign? Where should they start?
Yeah.
How should they start?
Good question.
So profitability is often seen in quarterly terms.
Yeah.
And that's understandable based on the structure of our market economy. But I think it's really important to take a longer term view. That profitability can shift very quickly. First of all, we know that. Secondly, that a company that seeks to be in business in the next 5, 10, 15 years, I mean, think 10 years back about what didn't exist in the world. 10 years back, read Krakoff. Welcome, Reed. We're going to come back to your question, but I know that we also, hi. How are you, my friend?
Good to see you.
Good to see you.
I'm going to leave you too.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kay. Thank you. It is great to see you.
Good to see you. Late.
Well, we understand, and we are happy you're here. And we have less time than we did before, and so I want to get into some questions. I'm just going to say a few words about Reed, now that he is here. Nice ones. Oh, only. Reed graduated in 1989 from Parsons. In 2017, 29 years later, he became the chief artistic officer at Tiffany and Company. And the idea was we were going to cover the 29 years in between, plus the future, all in 40 minutes, which isn't possible. Okay. So I thought I would do a kind of quick bio and then get into a couple of key questions. After '89, when Reed graduated, he left after graduating from Parsons. He worked for several classic American design houses, including 5 years at Ralph Lauren, before becoming the chief creative director at Tommy Hilfiger. From there, in 1996, is when the Coach years began, and as many of you know, he became the president and executive creative director at Coach, where he elevated that brand from a $500 million company to a $5 billion company. In 2010, he launched his own line of women's ready-to-wear handbags, shoes, and accessories. And then, as I said before, 2017 is Tiffany's. And he has been awarded and recognized so many times through the industry, and I'm going to not go into all of those right now because I wanted to get to some questions. So that's the sort of rough outline, but he scratched the surface of any of those things, and there are all of these stories in it. And I thought it would be really nice to start with photography, because you and I once had a lovely conversation about photography, because it preceded Parsons.
It did.
And I wanted to do so because I also wanted to begin where I thought we would end as well, which is not on my planet, but which we'll talk about at the end of this. And it's also really nice that Susan Toth and Zach Toth are here. And I wanted to mention them as well because they're here as we honor the extraordinary legacy of Michael Toth through our scholarship in his name, but also connected through photography, even though the creative agency is a sort of brilliance there, but his work in the US or Us American Stories, depending on how you tell that title, but as a photographer as well. And so image making and photography kind of connected a bunch of things. And I thought, let's start there with you.
So that's a broad topic. So I think before I get into photography specifically, it's a good example, or I should say my experience is a good example of being involved in lots of different creative pursuits and following things you like doing and things you're inspired by, and those things hopefully become part of your professional work life. I was talking to, actually, on Friday, a designer who's, I think, been in business 5 or 10 years, and we were talking about how to grow their business and should they change their strategy, should they take on investors, all those things that young designers talk about. And I remember the advice I got and the advice I always give, which is to just do what you love doing, and it'll lead somewhere good. That sounds simple and not easy to do. So photography for me was something I had done for a long, long time. And I stopped taking pictures actually when I started working with great photographers. People like, let's see who's a good example, Pamela Hansen, Peter Lindbergh, really the best photographers of our day. And realized, I think like anyone who's been good at one thing, you know how hard it is to be good at another thing. So I really didn't feel, I wanted to take pictures, at least professionally, because I really wasn't at the level of the people that I'd be competing with, even though I was a designer at the time. So I kind of stopped for a while, and then actually one of the people taking pictures was Mike Toth, who we just spoke about. His son and wife are here, who really inspired me to start taking pictures again, because he was actually really an advertising, a brilliant advertising executive. but he was also taking pictures. So he was doing layouts, he was pitching businesses, he was conceptualizing brand positioning, but he also took pictures. And it was just something that all of a sudden made sense again. So I started taking pictures again, and coming back to Parsons, actually, I really wanted to learn how to take a proper picture and not just be one of those people that hires themselves to take the pictures, because in fact, I was in charge. So I kind of put it on myself to say, I'm not going to, and there were many, many designers during this period that started taking pictures without naming them. They've all stopped since, to be honest. It was a moment when it sort of became a popular thing to do. So I really didn't want to be that person. I wanted to really learn. So we spoke, and I studied with Thomas Werner, who is one of the great teachers at Parsons graduate of photography. And I started like an assistant, loading film, exposures, setting up shots, Polaroids, all those fun things. And we worked together for a couple of years. And it was really rewarding that I really understood photography, and it made me a much better photographer, but also I felt better about starting to take pictures again. So, many, many, many campaigns and pictures later, here we are.
Well, we'll come back to Not on My Planet at the end, because you're taking pictures again in that context. But before we get there, we have to talk about Tiffany's. We have to talk about, for those who have followed it not closely enough, the extraordinary work you've done in the last almost 2 years there now, since 2017, beginning of 2017. In a lot of ways, the company has turned around. And one can argue that it is a design-led turnaround. I would argue it's a design-led turnaround. And you have this extraordinary position there. Artistic director, you're covering so much. In fact, it's the first time that title's been used in the company. Tell us about that.
So Tiffany is a brand, a company that I grew up with, like most people. They grew up around New York City, certainly. In the 80s and 70s when I did. It was really a part of my life. I remember going there with my mother, who was a decorator at the time, and we used to go see the tables that they would do with the most famous interior designers around the world. People, you might know some of them. Vladimir Kagan, who died pretty recently, was one of the great designers of the 20th century. Angelo Donghia, another one of the absolute great designers. He actually was the person who did Ralph Lauren's first apartment in New York City, which hasn't changed much. It's the all-white apartment on Fifth Avenue. Yes. People like...
And a Parsons alum.
And a Parsons alum, thank you. Ward Bennett as well. So really incredible design. I remember, I was probably 6, 7, 8, 9 years old. I really remember that, the feeling of something magic and something special and something that I just wanted to be around. I didn't really think to be a part of, but I definitely wanted to be around it. So for a very long time, I had thought about talking with the administration there, and it didn't seem like, it was a very corporate company, and they were doing very well, and it just didn't seem like a good fit. About 2 years ago, we started meeting, I had some meetings with some of the board members, and started talking about what could be. And Tiffany had never had a creative director before. It really existed more in the jewelry model. When you think about it, I don't think I can name a jeweler at any of the big jewelry houses today. When you think of all the European brands, there really aren't any. And the reason is because it's really run in a much more segmented way. Much more of there's a marketing person, there's a design person, there's PR and events, there's store design, there are windows, and they usually all report up into a CEO. And that's the way Tiffany was run up until 2 years ago. So with a lot of talking and a lot of getting to know each other, we agreed that we would embark on this sort of next chapter of Tiffany. So we brought together all the creative, so everyone works together now. It's very typical in fashion, but very atypical in, let's say, classic luxury. So it was something that, I wouldn't say it was a risk, but it was something that was a huge change. I have to say they've been amazing, supportive. The business has been, well, I don't think it's not been better in many, many, many years. I know the stock is down this week, but it hit an all-time high. It's actually doubled in the last year.
Well, and it's grown 12% in this most recent reporting. It was declining 3% when you arrived. Correlation.
There you go. Who knows? But it's an amazing company. The thing that was surprising about Tiffany was, as soon as we started doing things that were interesting and engaging, getting people attention, it was obvious that people loved the brand. There was nothing wrong. It was just kind of sleepy. When we opened the Blue Box Cafe, it wasn't something, to be honest, when I designed it, it wasn't something I thought this is going to be a big deal. It just seemed like a logical idea to have breakfast at Tiffany's. But in fact, Tiffany had never been in that business before.
Yeah.
The first day, there was a line actually around the block, and we had people flying in from Japan, from all over the country, from Europe, just to have breakfast there. So immediately, it was obvious that people love Tiffany, and if we just give them more excitement and give them more of what they want, they'll come back. So far, so good.
And tell us about Paper Flowers, right? It's been described as the most successful launch of a new line in a decade at Tiffany's.
So Paper Flowers was the first, it was the third or fourth collection since I started, but it was the first high jewelry collection in almost 10 years. We just launched the first engagement setting, Teen True, this week actually. Which is the first setting in more like 20 years, true setting.
Wow.
It was an amazing experience to have such an incredible company launch something on such a big scale. The Paper Flowers launch was pretty radical at the way we did it. I mean, it was quite different. We ended up doing a film that was kind of a full-size Hollywood backlot. I think we shot at Paramount Studios. We had an event at the store. We had never really had a concert at the store. We had A$AP Ferg on a stage above the opening of the flagship performing, and then it was pretty crazy, actually. There was one point, I have to say, that I thought, was this a good idea?
When was that? At what point?
You know when it was? It was when I was sitting on the set and we were filming. It was like 300 people, this big production, and there were all these people dressed. Everyone was dressed in Tiffany blue. The whole city was Tiffany blue. We had taxis and painters and trucks and school buses, and I was like, I hope this works out. Yeah. So there's no going back now. But it was, it's one of those things that, if you're not making, first and foremost, I have to be a little uncomfortable always. Otherwise, I'm not doing anything.
Yeah.
A lot of times I've said my job is to make people a little uncomfortable. And what's always amazing is the thing you need to do is usually the thing that scares you the most.
Yeah.
And that goes for everything, for design, for marketing. We redid one of our stores really early on, and it was really different. And it was super successful. And what was amazing is that after we did it, no one thought anything of it. And while we were doing it, we thought, we can't do that. We have a 5-foot corrugated cardboard bear coming out of a wall in the baby section of the flagship. We had a portrait, like a 6-foot portrait of Charles Tiffany done out of sheetrock screws. And we had done like a kind of bazooka joke, silk screens taped all over it was just something that was, in a funny way, it was kind of funny that we thought we were doing something really radical, and it was no one said anything. They just liked it, basically, and we were worried that everyone was going to be fired, basically.
Is there...
Could happen still. We don't know.
The design process is usually pretty good at sort of weeding out the things that are really too far, and maybe not far enough. But has there been a situation where that uncomfortableness got out of control and you said, whoa, that one actually went too far? I mean, can you give us an example of
It usually doesn't get to that point.
Yeah.
It's something that, and everyone who works with me knows this, I a lot of times know something's not right, but I'm not exactly sure what it is. So it just like sits in my stomach for a couple of weeks, usually, just sort of right there. And at some point, it reveals itself. It sounds a bit new agey, but it's kind of true.
Yeah.
All these different parts of the business are so intermingled that one meeting can give you the answer, even though it has nothing to do with that. You might be working on a window. Well, we were just working on something actually that had to do with the idea of the Tiffany box and the idea of a blue box, which is not a gift box, but just a cube. And then that led to product design, and that's led to some pop-up ideas, and that led to a whole concept around. I mean, it fed an entire 6 months of creative work.
Yeah.
And you just don't know when that's coming. The thing that you have to do is just, you have to let go a bit. And
How
just
do you
believe
keep
it's
How do
coming.
you keep yourself open to that as a designer, especially when you're you're so successful in these various areas that can make you a little cautious, perhaps?
You know, I think, and I probably, it's just, I'm lucky to have a lot of experience, obviously. I've done it a long time. But once you realize that there's no one way to do things, it's very freeing that at the end of the day, there's many answers. So whether it's design or whether, I never get upset about if a fabric doesn't come in the right color or we can't find, and especially in jewelry, a lot of times stones are unavailable. You design something and there just aren't any of that particular stone in that size. So you have to change direction, and you have to take it as part of the process. You can't take it as a setback. You have to take it as just, nothing's perfect. No one that I know, sits and sketches an idea and it goes from beginning to end without it changing. It's just not real. And it shouldn't. It shouldn't. It needs to morph and become difficult. And, there's never, when you look at great photography, going back to pictures, most great pictures, especially marketing, advertising, are little moments that happened on set. You spend 5 hours shooting and then starts raining and someone goes to sleep in a pile of coats, and always that becomes the picture. It happens so many times, I can't tell you. Pile of coats. No, I'm serious. Those real moments, you cannot force them. You have to just create an environment for them to happen.
So help answer a question that was in the room just as you walked in. We were talking a little bit about how successful companies change in the moment when they're successful, right? This question had to do with sustainability and circular economy, but a company that maybe isn't thinking that way and is successful, an existing company, how do you grab that moment sort of over the horizon that's not quarterly in nature, but has a slightly longer term?
So how do you become a better global citizen, in fact, Tiffany, it's an unusual case. Tiffany has been doing things the way customers expect them to be done forever. 20, 30 years. Tiffany's had a relationship with organizations involved with the oceans, with wildlife conservation, with appropriate mining practices. If you go to one of our factories in the US, in Rhode Island, it's 100%, it regenerates itself in terms of even the soap that washes off the sterling castings is regenerated. It's cleaned and regenerated. Every speck of sterling and gold is regenerated, melted, and used again. For whatever reason, and it's hard to know, Tiffany has been that way for a very, very long time. We're now just starting to talk about it. In terms of our mining practices, we are, actually it's not great for anyone, but it's pretty stark what happened. I don't know if anyone has read about what's happening in Myanmar. If I designed something that had a ruby in it, we don't have any rubies because we will not mine in a place that there are human rights issues. So, Tiffany means what it says. Most companies don't. They have a little bit of a PR thing. But so for us, it's quite natural. And we're really just starting to talk about what we're doing versus a lot of brands, especially younger brands, are starting to do it almost from a PR perspective. We need to say we do this, what can we do? So Tiffany has really been doing it forever in every aspect. Diversity, inclusivity, environmental protection, again, sourcing, mining, labor, almost really every aspect of what you would imagine Tiffany's been part of. So other companies, it's tough because there's costs involved, there's long-term costs involved. It's not an easy thing to say, we are not going to buy diamonds from these mines because we don't really know where they came from. They're going to cost more. And, Wall Street doesn't want to hear that your costs went up but it's something you have to do. It's, more and more, of course, consumers want to know. It's not that they want to, they demand to know.
Yeah.
Soon enough, people will not buy products that they feel are produced in a way that's not ethical. So you have to do it.
Yeah.
You have to. It's the right thing to do.
So at some point it becomes, it moves from the advertising to the strategy and design, the center really of the company.
Absolutely. And it's, again, there are certain things we can't buy because there was something we were working on. It was lapis. I wanted to do something in lapis, and we're not allowed to buy it. Exotic skins we don't buy. There's just, and the reality is that I'd probably forgotten about it. We moved on to something else. And there are always other ways to do things. Getting back to that point about there's no one way to be successful.
Yeah. So I want to make sure that we have a couple minutes to get questions from the audience. So I'm going to end or at least our conversation portion where we began, which is to just finishing the thought on the sustainability and the ethical perspective of Tiffany's, the project with the Wildlife Conservation Network, the not KNOT, Not on My Planet, and you've been taking the pictures.
Yeah.
So tell us about that and think about your questions, and we'll put some microphones out here.
So Tiffany's been involved, as I said, for many years in conservation, and there is a group that particularly is focused on elephants, and it's the slogan is "Not on My Planet," and it has to do with ivory poaching, and their whole venture is to try to basically to wipe that out. And the only way to do it is to raise money for rangers, for education, for to get the word out, essentially. So the last actually 2 years, I've shot the campaigns for Not on My Planet. And what's really nice is that everyone who's participated, in a lot of big names, Naomi Campbell, people like that, give their time. Stylists, hair and makeup, everyone donates their time. And it's been a campaign that's gotten, it's kind of incredible. It's gotten amazing support from the industry. Both, it's mostly organic, it's very grassroots. But looking across social media, it's gotten, I don't know, a few million impressions just in the few months after. And we've raised, I think, $7 million in the last 2 years.
Fantastic.
So it was a great way to do something right, do something that fit with our position in the world, and obviously help people out.
Well, you couldn't have known what the lead into all of this was, but you basically just reinforced everything I was saying right before you walked in the room, which is that this age we live in which we are redesigning everything we do, is driven by these concerns around shared common future, around the ethics, around the materials, and beauty and desirability all at the same time.
What's just the last comment on that? What's amazing is how quickly customers or consumers are changing. So it's a little different than someone, we were talking about, people would say a corollary is anti-fur, but it really isn't. Anti-fur was sort of it's something that's bounced around for 40 years, since the 70s. I remember people throwing red paint on Anna Wintour in the 80s. It was more of, I would say, an outlier kind of movement. This is something much more meaningful. This is actually the way people want to live their lives. And what's funny is that most of the people that I work with, these are all things that are just, you should do.
Yeah.
It's not, again, like the anti-fur. There was a whole thing around different movements in the industry over the years, but this is something that's an entire change to how people perceive designing, making luxury, and it's what the customers really are going to insist on more and more over time.
So let's get some questions from the audience, and while we're getting you the mic, I don't know if you know this piece of history, Reed, but Parsons actually has a long connection to Tiffany's. Van de Truix, who was the... Yes, Van de Truix was, Reed knows it, he was the design director for Tiffany's. He was the third dean of Parsons after Frank Parsons, Charles Odom, and Van de Truix, 1955.
And the lore, I don't know if it's true, you know the story about the Parsons table.
Yep, go ahead.
So Van de Truix was, I don't know if everyone knows who Jean-Michel Franck is. He was probably the greatest industrial designer, the most influential still. He only lived to be about 35 years old. He was friends with Van de Truix. And the story is that the table that they created, which is a table that it's the simplest but most copied table in the history of tables, I would say, was created when Van de Truix was at Parsons.
In Parsons, Paris.
Yes.
Because
Franck was in Paris.
Yes, and Frank Parsons sent Van de Truix to set up the Paris campus. And
that part I didn't know.
Yep.
So,
sorry, we're just going to do Parsons history. Was anyone here in that year? I don't think so.
We have one right here.
Yeah. There it is. Kay's got the Parsons table.
thank you.
So I'm actually a student currently, strategic design and management. And my question is, how does one become a creative director or artistic director?
So that's a good question. It was, how does one become a creative director or an artistic director? There's probably no one answer. I think if you look at like the last, I have to say, Tom Ford, another Parsons alumni, he really created the role. I sat next to him at something years ago, and I thanked him for creating this job. He really did create the idea that a designer could be part of the executive group, could have something to say about the business, could have something to say about stores and marketing, not just be in the design room and sketch and cut and sew. That was really what it was. So why did that happen? It happened when he went to Gucci in '92, I think it was, because everyone realized the business was getting so complicated and the world was getting much more discerning. There was much more of a globalization of fashion. You go to Paris, you go to Milan, you go to Hong Kong, and you see similar things, that there needed to be a stronger, more holistic message. So that was sort of the birth of the creative director. Then everyone on the planet, every company had a creative director, and then no one did. So it's funny, like people that are left, well, actually there was a sort of a bump in between, which was, there was the creative director that had their own brand. Michael was at Celine, Narciso had Loewe, on and on. And then as the world started to speed up, it became impossible. And if you notice, there is no one. There is not one designer now that has their own brand and works for a major brand. There's one who has a very small personal brand. So it went from nothing to a lot of people to this sort of diversified version of being a creative director. And now I would say the best way to become a creative director is, I think design is at the center, because product is everything. You know, I always laugh about everywhere I've worked, when business is good, everyone takes credit for it. You know, the retail group, they just had a new training program. Those windows, they just washed them. You know, people can see better through the windows. I wish I was joking. But when it's bad, it's always the fingers always pointed at the designer, and they just say, I can't sell that stuff. And that was a nice way of putting it. So for me, design is everything. Because if you can't create the right product, it doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter what incredible campaign, what beautiful stores, because at the end of the day, that's why people come in. That's why people go online. That's why people want to be part of your brand. So I would begin in design, but at the same time, I would try to get involved in sort of smaller aspects of marketing and advertising, store design. It's just take an interest in it, and that's how things happen. When I was at Ralph Lauren, it was before Tom Ford went to Gucci. I just would sign up for anything. You know, I worked on windows, I would dress the mannequins, I would, whatever I could do. I mean, that's always the best way. My advice is always do anything you can possibly do. Say yes to everything. You know, whether it's folding sweaters, which of course I did. Actually, when I was at Ralph Lauren, my boss said, you need to fold all those sweaters. And there was a mountain of cable knit sweaters. And I said, well, I don't really fold sweaters very well. She's like, better learn. Close the door on me. She said, time to learn, and slammed the door on me. So, you know, my advice is always be curious, be eager. And if you love it, you will be. You know, you will be eager. You will be curious. And again, I've never had to think about it. And that's one of the things I've said about Parsons many times. I learned who I wanted to be when I came here. I really didn't before. I studied fine arts at the Boston School Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. I studied economics and art history at Tufts. I did a lot of things. I studied music at Berklee School of Music. I was the worst there.
What was your instrument?
Jazz guitar. I was one of 600, I'm not exaggerating, 600 of the best jazz guitarists in the world. And I found out in like an hour that I sucked, pretty much. But it was good, though, because I kind of got it out of my system. I was really good for someone who didn't go to Berklee. And then I found out almost immediately. But, you know, I would urge you to just sign up for things, volunteer, do freelance work, study what's happening. You have to be voracious in terms of absorbing what's out there. You know, every campaign, every film, every celebrity endorsement. Why are they doing it? Why did it work? Did it work? Did it not work? What would I have done? You know, you have to just have that natural, if you love it, you will. But design, gotta start with design. Gotta start with design.
Let's take one over on this side.
Hi, thank you so much. So I just want to bring back the topic to photography. And as you already mentioned, you mentioned the Michael C. Toth Foundation, and I was one of the participants. So I just wanted to bring it back because it's such a big honor to be here. And just coming back to photography, or I guess anybody else, when you hire someone or when you work with someone, like what is your decision making? Like how do you go on about, as you said, like you mentioned a couple of photographer names, you mentioned a couple of names, and I guess like those names are so important that they were the first ones to come up. So like what made those people special that you would mention them in this conversation? Thank you so much.
That's a good question, and it's in a very positive way. The world has changed radically in the last 5 years in terms of photography. The idea of the star photographer doesn't really exist anymore, to be honest. No one is looking to do what everyone else did. There are photographers who shot 5 different major brands at one time. It's just, those days are over. So there's a lot of openness for creativity, uniqueness, a unique voice. That's what I think all of us are looking for. Half the photographers I get presented to me, and we have someone I work with who basically her job is to just scour the earth for creativity, whether it's artists, illustrators, photographers. I've never heard of them. That never would have happened 5 years ago. There were 5 agents, there were 10 photographers, they did all the campaigns, and now what people are looking for is something real. Not produced, not, a version of, because they're doing well, which is what it used to be. It's wide open now. Filmmakers, photographers, creative artists. I'm working with so many different people, from collage artists to photographers, filmmakers. Just worked with an animator on a project. So in a funny way, it went from being very difficult with the advent of digital photography and the iPhone, and everyone became a photographer, to now where everyone kind of got over that, and now they're looking for real ideas. So it's 100% about having a unique voice, 100%.
Hi, I would like to bring back to the Tiffany story. I'm super interested in the everyday objects, that whole launch and the whole campaign, because I'm running consumer insights. So I try to understand people's buying behaviors. So I kind of want to know, how did that happen? And is that a PR movement, or that's a real serious project going on?
No, it's a great question about how did everyday objects, how did that become a thing at Tiffany? So the reality is that I was just doing more of what had already been done. The bizarre part was no one at the company knew they did it. I mean, Tiffany has a 180-year history. A lot of things happened during that period. But Warhol did an installation in the 60s with a tin can and some cigarettes in it. And I just found it somewhere. I don't remember, in a book somewhere. Van de Truex did you know those baskets you put berries in at like a farm when you pick berries? He made one in solid sterling with the staples, everything, exactly the same, which is exactly what I did. So I'd love to say I was super brilliant and original, but it was really just doing more of what they did. And the bird's nest came from an ad that I found from the 50s, I think, where there was a bird's nest, actual bird's nest with 3 huge diamonds in it. So it was, for me, whenever I work on these things, I try to figure out the thinking behind it. I don't really care about the archives. I shouldn't say that, but I really don't. I'm interested in how people thought about the brand. Because once you understand how to think about it, it's limitless what you can create, and everything falls into place. When you just take things from the archive and you don't really understand why or how, it's not that helpful. So the first thing, but then the strange thing was there was a moment that triggered it, which was I was in the store. I was walking around with a woman who knows everyone and everything. She was telling me all these stories. She gave me a paper cup, and I started taking pictures of it with my phone, and she thought, that's weird. Why are you taking pictures of that with your phone? And I said, no, it's just kind of like a perfect thing. Like I want that cup because it's simple and it's Tiffany blue, but it's made out of nothing, just plain old paper. I said that's a perfect proxy for what Tiffany has been in the best days and should be. So then I sent it to our silversmith, and they made an exact copy of it with the contents hot, caution, and the crimping around the bottom, and the rolled edge, the seam. And I could put it on a table, and everyone understood what I was talking about. Think about Elsa Peretti, Diamonds by the Yard. I mean, it's exactly the same thinking. Or think of the Tiffany setting is based on functionality. It's not based on beauty. It's based on the very American ideal that beauty is an outgrowth of functionality. You know, the construction creates the detail. I mean, it's Charles Eames said that. It's such a fundamental American thing. So I created all these different things with the team, from Sharpies but it was funny, once we did the paper cup, it was just, we couldn't stop. I think we had 80 different things, from bird's nests, a ball of string, Sharpies, bookends, paper clips, what other things were in the first collection? Tin cans, coffee cans. But without understanding how that Warhol thought about it, and how Van de Truex thought about it, and how Elsa Peretti thought about it, I would never have gotten to that point. The part that wasn't so good is that we got slammed in the press. And it's a good example of having to be a little brave, because I was a little nervous. I mean, how could I not be? There was a lot of stories. It was even on Jimmy Kimmel. I mean, he said the person who thought of that should be neutered. I remember he said that, so that they can't reproduce. I was thinking, like, did that really happen? And someone sent me the little clip. The problem was someone had made a mistake on the website, and it said tin can, $1,000. And that person's no longer with the company, to be honest. But it didn't occur to them that that was a bad idea to say that. And I said, why would you not put sterling silver? Because a sterling silver can at that size, that's a very normal price for that. Go to Asprey, go to Dunhill. But that's really what triggered it. So I got a lot of shit from investors, from the board, from it was rough for a couple days. And then all of a sudden, you know, it's so silly. Then it was, what a brilliant move by Tiffany. You know, it wasn't what we did at all. But it was funny how it was a horrible idea, and then 3 days later it was an amazing idea. And so to answer your question, it really grew out of design. And then it became this idea of everyday objects, and then it became everyday luxury, and then Tiffany became, or is becoming, luxury that you wear every day, which is very American and democratic. And again, that kind of all rolled into a positioning statement. And now we just had a very successful high jewelry event, and the whole idea, and actually shot a story for Town & Country that's coming out next month about high jewelry being worn in a new way. That people don't wear ball gowns anymore. That people don't go to black ties the way they used to. That a person who spends $500,000 on a necklace wants to be able to wear it more than once a year. So we shot people like Jessica Williams in a concert T-shirt and $1 million diamond necklace. We shot, who else is in there that you would know? A big group of people, but it was basically styled the way all of you are, but wearing high jewelry, men and women both. We had men wearing big brooches and women wearing amazing jewelry, and it's sort of, that little project grew into the high jewelry concept.
I think we have time for just one more.
You want one more? Okay.
Yeah.
I can do
One more question?
I can stay for a couple minutes.
Reed is going to be able to take two more.
I was late.
2. I'll go up towards the top.
Hi, I'm Carrie Ann. I just graduated from the Strategic Design Management program in the spring. I'm a budding bridal designer, and I also am with Tiffany. And for me, being at Tiffany has awarded me the opportunity to follow a lot of your amazing career. And I think that a lot of the people, a lot of the creatives in the room would probably appreciate this question. And it would pretty much, if there was one piece of advice that you would give to a budding designer, what would that single most important piece of advice be?
It's probably what I've said for a very long time. It's probably what my father said to me, which was, it's not going to be very impressive, I have to warn you. It is simple. It is work hard, don't be a jerk. That's what my dad told me. And
we could use fewer jerks in the world.
But it's actually, I'm always amazed, to be a bit more serious about it, I'm always amazed how people don't appreciate when they're in a beautiful company like Tiffany or like another company. And I think today, I don't think it's today, it's every generation, I think, feels this way to the older generation. But I think if people can slow down and appreciate where they are, the good of where you are, and try to enjoy your time there, you do better work. And it is the responsibility of the leadership. I always put it on myself. One of the things I'm most proud of is that people that worked for me for 15 years have come work for me at Tiffany, quite a few. And honestly, I'm as proud of that as I am of anything. My whole thing is I want people to love coming to work. And I know that people stay late, work harder, do better work, and have a better life if they like being there. I don't want to come to work with people cranky and feeling overworked and misunderstood. I don't know where it came from, but I'm really, really insistent on, if you're not happy, let's talk about it. Maybe it's not the right place for you, but you shouldn't be unhappy sketching jewelry. Like, if you work in a bank, that might make you unhappy, or if you have a job you really don't love. But I try to get people to see how they can love being at work. And if it doesn't work, then that's life, and they try something else. So my whole thing is, do anything you're asked to do and always ask for more. Working hard is always a good thing. It's never not a good thing. And you can always get ahead by doing more. You will not get ahead, especially today, without taking on more work, being curious, and being one of the people that people want to be around. I mean, it can come to that. It's pretty simple. Yes.
Last question?
Last question.
Sure.
Okay.
I worked at Tiffany when you were in Parsons.
Ah.
And it was a totally different place.
Bet.
I was there 3.5 years in their stationery design.
Ah.
And I'm a Parsons graduate, and guess how I got the job? Career Services,
Oh, that's
right
great.
here. Yeah.
Was John Loring? He was there.
Yeah, John
I-
Loring.
I just
and,
saw him yesterday.
Oh, really? Oh. And when I was working there,
Small world.
Avon had just broken their partnership with Tiffany's. So they moved from, the design department moved from Avon to Tiffany, ninth floor. And that's where I worked for 3.5
Oh,
years.
wow.
And one of the things, there are a lot of funny stories, and especially because I was mostly in people contact jobs prior to working there, I was upset about being with the same people every day. You know, in small cubicles, that's how it was. But we had a lot of fun. So the whole atmosphere of being with other artists every day was really fun.
Definitely.
And seeing what kind of creative things. So it's interesting that you said now that all the designers are in one work together and they weren't separated.
Yeah.
Well, we were in the same area in different little groups, you know. But one of the things that they did come to us for would be, I was doing a lot of monograms for custom monograms, but some of the China buyers would come up and say, who wants to do a border to go with this private stock Tiffany China pattern? And they go, Marilyn, that's me. Do you want to do it? Or Colette or John? There were 3 of us, you know, in that little group. And so I did do some borders, and they made stationery out of them to go with the China patterns. So that was, you know, an adventure, but no computers.
Right. Like,
Pre-computer.
wow. That's impressive.
Okay, well, listen, I really want to thank you, Reed, so
My
much
pleasure.
for coming back to school
Thank you.
and for having this conversation. It's always such a pleasure to talk with you. I want to thank the alumni who've come back today. I want to make sure that you all go to the opening across the street. I want to thank Colette Robbins, who was MFA Fine Arts 2007, who has curated the exhibition, Primal Machines, that's on display. And I look forward to joining you over there for a drink, but mostly I'd like to really thank our guest, Reed Krakoff.